What's going on, everybody? MNKD Rising here, and today I'm going to give you a look at the new hybrid DPS build that I've been running. I've run this build through all sorts of content, heroic solos, heroic open world, legendary missions, and I'm really enjoying the playability of this build along with the damage output and the survivability that it creates. There are a few variations in gear and talents that you could run, and I will go over those different options, but for me, this is the setup that I find strikes the perfect balance between doing enough damage and being able to stay alive, because remember, it doesn't matter how much damage you can do if you aren't on your feet shooting or running your skills. The first thing to notice with this build is the specialization. With this build, I run the Technician specialization since it gives you that +1 skill tier, meaning you only need to run 5 pieces of gear with skill tier, and the 6th can be your choice. As for weapons with this build, I am running the Harmony named rifle, and while there are certainly stronger rifles to run with it, none are going to have the added damage bonus that the perfectly in sync talent brings to the table, as well as the high rate of fire. You could run a slightly slower firing rifle that has higher base damage and then transfer the in-sync talent onto it, however. For the secondary weapon in this build, I run the Bullet King. You can really run any weapon that you prefer with it and then transfer the in-sync talent over, but for me, I prefer to have the Bullet King handy as my secondary in most of my builds. I don't feel there is anything that beats carrying a second weapon that never needs to be reloaded and will always have ammo in it when you switch over without thought. I run the Maxim 9 sidearm with this build for the perfect spite talent, but in truth, I have never had the need to switch to it running this build. Really, you just want something that packs a punch for your sidearm if you need it. The first piece of gear in this build is my Wyvern mask. The Wyvern one piece brand set gives plus 10% skill damage, and the piece itself is rolled critical hit chance and skill damage. It has a utility mod for skill haste on the mask. I would prefer to have a Hana U to have that red mod slot, but this was the best piece I had at the time. The second piece of gear is a Hana U named backpack, the Force Multiplier. The first brand set bonus for Hana U is plus 10% skill haste. This piece is rolled critical hit chance and critical hit damage with a critical hit damage mod. The talent is Perfect Combined Arms, which grants plus 30% skill damage for 3 seconds after shooting an enemy. The third piece of gear is a pair of Walker Harris & Co. gloves. These grant a plus 5% weapon damage for the first brand set bonus, and this pair is rolled to skill tier with critical hit chance and critical hit damage. The reason I went with these was to gain a slight damage buff to any weapon I was using, as opposed to the plus 10% rifle or plus 10% LMG damage buff. The knee pads are Hana U to gain the plus 10% skill damage second brand set bonus. These are rolled skill damage and critical hit chance. The holster is also Hana U to get the third brand set bonus, plus 5% weapon damage. These are also rolled skill damage and critical hit chance. The final piece for this is the named Grupo Sombra chest piece, the Door Kicker's Knock. The first brand set bonus is plus 15% critical hit damage. This piece has weapon damage, skill damage, and skill haste with a skill haste mod. The talent on this is Perfect Spark, which grants plus 15% total weapon damage after damaging an enemy with a skill. I'd prefer this piece to not have the skill haste on it, but this was the only Door Kicker's Knock that I had. For an increase in damage, you could also use a Glass Cannon talent, or if you wanted a little bit better survivability, you could use Unbreakable, which, depending on the situation, I have been known to switch this over to. In this build, I have 54.1% critical hit chance and 109.2% critical hit damage. Those could both be slightly higher if I didn't have the skill haste on the chest piece, as well as a Hana U mask instead of the Wyvern to get the red mod slot. The build itself has 35% added weapon damage from the Door Kicker's Knock, the Hana U brand set bonus, and the Walker Harris & Co bonus. I also have added weapon damage from my watch. It has 26% rifle damage bonus from the Harmony and talent from the specialization, and I did change the specialization specking to include the LMG damage as well. As I mentioned, I would prefer a Hana U mask for the additional red mod slot to gain some more critical hit damage, and then I would also prefer for the chest piece to have either critical hit chance or critical hit damage instead of skill haste. And the reason for that is because with this build, the goal is to deploy the skills and clear areas before your skills go down, making the skill haste itself completely unnecessary. Really, you're not worried about how quickly you can throw your skills again, you're more concerned about getting them deployed, getting everything in the room cleared out, and then allowing them to cool down while you're moving from area to area. Obviously, that's not always the case, as some rooms are larger than others and have longer engagements, but overall, I think the goal is to not have skill haste and just increase the damage. For skills with this build, the primary two that I use are the Striker Drone and the Assault Turret. This is where having that skill tier 6 really is important, in that it gives the drone and turret an additional 120% damage and 420% health. Of those two, the health bonus is the main factor in ensuring that you are at skill tier 6 for a build like this, because it's almost all about deploying skills and them being active as long as possible. It's almost a set and forget type loadout, because once you deploy your skills, you don't really want to be thinking about them unless you need to target a specific NPC. Your overall goal is to deploy the skills and then spend as much time shooting as possible to make sure that your talents are fully procced at all times. Reason behind that is the fully procced talents of this build is worth an additional 70% skill damage and 55% weapon damage. There are some changes that could be made to this build. For instance, if you want to increase your total overall damage, you could run the glass cannon talent on your chest piece, which would make your overall skill damage plus 95% when fully procced and plus 65% weapon damage. Personally though, since this build means you must be shooting at least every 3 seconds to keep your talents active, I don't like the extra damage that I take when running the glass cannon. Conversely, with this build you could also increase your skill damage further by switching the chest talent to kinetic momentum. That would, however, come at a cost to weapon damage. It is a good option, but when running this build in legendary missions, I don't like to sacrifice the weapon damage for extra skill damage for when you encounter the heavies whose backpacks you want to break, and nothing beats a strong weapon for doing that. So there you have my hybrid DPS build and how I run it. Like I said, there are a bunch of different ways that you can do it, some different talents that you can put into it, but after testing out a good number of combinations of talents, weapons, gear pieces, this is what I've found to be the best for how I play. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, leave it below, and thanks for taking the time to check out my hybrid DPS build.